So I'm talking about the Bolivian land reform. That's all I'm going to talk about is the land reform in Bolivia, because Bolivia represents an incredible revolution of lots of different things. There's a constitutional revolution. There's a new constitution of 2009. So they got a brand new leader, which is a Native American, which represents 95% of the people. They're not being bought and sold by the corporations. They're not being bullied by the U.S. They're taking significant steps for autonomy. They're nationalizing a lot of their raw materials and resources, and they're instituting land reform. And land reform is incredible. They've done land reform before, and land reform before had helped them a lot, but they didn't do enough. Okay, so following the 1952 revolution led by the Revolutionary National Movement, Bolivian peasants pressed the new government to redistribute land to them, often taking the initiative by occupying haciendas and large plantations on their own. August 2nd, 1953, President Victor Paz Estenssoro signed the Land Reform Law Decree 3464, which ended conditions of servitude on haciendas, redistributed lands to peasants, and transferred management of rural communities to agrarian trade unions. These trade unions became the legal representatives of three types of communities: original communities, who continued pre-colonial land ownership; ex-hacienda communities, formed by workers who inherited large estates; and new communities formed by formerly landless families. The principal instrument for this transfer was the National Institute for Agrarian Reform, the INRA, created by the 1953 law. The MNR largely politically abandoned this effort by the 1960s, but continuing titled under military rule resulted in a total redistribution as of 74.5% of all agricultural land from 1952 to 1977. So 75% of the land, of agricultural land, was redistributed. So lots of it, 3/4 of it, was eventually redistributed. Whether it's fair or not, the intent at the beginning was the working people, the landless people, and then those who had already had pre-colonial ties. So this has been in our family forever, so this is a community land. So state and organized and spontaneous colonization of the eastern lowland plains in the 1960s and 70s, including both the small-scale colonization and concentration of much land in the hands of the mestizo elite. So again, we're seeing the elite and the land speculating companies and corporations taking over, very much like the 1862 Homestead Act of America, the American Homestead Act. So the National Colonization Institute, founded in 1965, dissolved in 1992, promoted migration and colonization by some 70,000 predominantly highland Aymara and Quechua families towards colonization zones in San Julian, Santa Cruz, Alta Beni, La Paz, and Chapare, Cochabamba, among other regions. Meanwhile, INRA distributed lands in the eastern and northern lowlands on the basis of promises to develop the lands, leading to large-scale agribusiness. So the large corporations eventually took, but they were, again, it was designed for the Aymara and the Quechua people, and these are like the original peoples. These are like, the Native Americans that were here before the Europeans got here. A new agrarian reform law, the Law 1715, was passed on October 1996. So they got the new Constitution in 2009, but they're passing, land reform in October 96, which both recognize collective indigenous titles through the native community lands and shifted agrarian reform standards away from production and towards tax payment as a standard of productivity. So before, it was whether or not the land was being produced. Was the land being produced for anything? If it was not, then therefore it was wasted land. So why not give it to a landless peasant who would at least try to do something instead of just sit and let it be wasted for nothing? They changed the productivity standards to tax payments as a standard of productivity. If this land is productive, therefore they're creating money, they can pay their taxes. And so that's the standard. This law placed a 10-year time limit on the titling of land, but only 8.6% of the 106 million hectares under INRA jurisdiction completed the land title clearing process by 2005. On November 29, 2006, under pressure by campesino and indigenous movements, the Bolivian government approved to streamline the titling process while moving the final deadline to 2013. Last year, the law also adopts collective or community-based titles as the preferred means for distributing land. By 2010, 51% of claims have resulted in finalized titles, with 40% of the titled land in Native American community lands and 39% in state-controlled fiscal lands. So they've had land reform, and it was successful. Evidently, there was some pushback, and somebody said, what would stop an owner from blowing up their own mines? Well, usually the mines or the factories actually became the fortresses for the revolution. So you wouldn't just be blowing the mine, you'd be blowing a lot of people up too. So that would be innocent bloodshed. And they might say, it's my property, my land, I can do as I please. And in some respects, you know, the property laws and being private, they kind of have a point. And that's not good. That's a horrible thing. That's why privatization of everything isn't a good thing. Because how can you protect, you know, workers' rights or people's rights or their health rights, you know? To private corporations, basically not giving out, you know, these safety mechanisms would save them a little bit of money, and who cares, you know, if they die, who cares, it doesn't matter. So that's why you need government to keep the private usurers, the private-owned corporations from running roughshod with their greed on top of everybody. So that's Wikipedia. Here's a really good article. It's written April 1st, 2013, so it's last year. Land reform in Bolivia and the promise of land redistribution from the wealthy latifundistas and the agro-business elites to poor farmers and indigenous communities have been a hallmark of President Evo Morales' administration. So this is Evo Morales. Evo Morales is the new president, the socialist president that's been elected, who's very much following in the footsteps of Hugo Chavez. We're seeing a pink sort of revolution happen. It's not full-blown communism. It's sort of a half. It's a mixture. And so we're seeing some of the things under Hugo. We're seeing it under Bolivia, the president of Bolivia, with Evo Morales. And so Morales administration. Recent data from the National Agrarian Reform Institute, INRA, I-N-R-A, INRA, provided a useful picture of what the Morales government has accomplished to date, as well as the unfinished business that lies ahead. According to INRA, 157 million acres of land have been surveyed and titled since 1996 under Bolivia's land regularization laws, benefiting more than 1 million people. Some 134 million acres, or 85%, have been titled during the last 7 years under Morales, compared to just 23 million between 1996 and 2005 under past neoliberal governments. 1/3 of all regularized land is now held collectively by indigenous and peasant organizations in the form of self-governing native community lands, TCOs or TIOCs, primarily but by no means exclusively in Bolivia's eastern lowlands. Another 22% is owned in the form of individual or family plots by small farmers and colonizers, Western Highland farmers who have resettled in the lowlands. Together, peasants and indigenous communities hold 88 million acres of titled land, 55% more than double the amount they controlled in 1992, according to INRA. Another 57 million acres of regularized land is now titled to the Bolivian government, a virtually non-existent category of pre-INRA. Of this total, some 3.5 million acres have been redistributed to peasant and indigenous groups, benefiting 11,373 families and 271 communities, virtually all under Evo Morales. Another 11.6 million acres is potentially available for redistribution. Most state lands protected as forests and national parks are not available. The remaining 7% of titled land is owned by large and medium-sized owners. Of the 290,000 land titles issued, more than 90% have been issued under Evo Morales. 90% of all the land, you know, titled have been under his presidency. Almost 1/4 has been granted to women. So 1/4 of the land is going. So this massive land redistribution under Evo Morales is going to be more efficient, more effective, and it's going to be right. And already 1/4 are given to the women. So these are going to have long effects that goes way into the future. You're going to see Bolivia be pushed into the modern century, the modern era, and you're going to see them actually start to make money, make wealth, and also do well for themselves, living under a socialist system, what would be called, by all definitions, a socialist system. So, another 37% to men and women jointly. This marks a historical shift for Bolivia, where women have long been excluded from land ownership. Still, the pace of land titling has fallen short of legal requirements and popular expectations. The amount of land regularized to date represents only 60% of the total 262 million acres in Bolivia that is legally required to be titled by October 2013. INRA officials say they will need another 5 years to complete the process, with the most complicated and conflicted ownership situations yet to be addressed. Critics include Juan Carlos Rojas, former director of INRA under Morales, charged that the land titling and redistribution process has slowed considerably in the past couple of years. So that's some small things. As a case in point, the ongoing Tipnis Highway controversy, fueled in large part by the conflict over land. Vast tracts of desirable agricultural land in eastern lowlands continue to be held by agribusiness and ranching elites, many foreigners, dating back to the 1970s when military dictators awarded patronage land grants to their political cronies to promote export agriculture. While holdings that predate the 2009 Constitution are exempt from the legal limit of 12,350 acres, critics argue that much of this land is speculatively held, not serving a socio-economic purpose as required by law, and could be reclaimed by the government through an aggressive land titling process. By some estimates, the Morales government has seized around 25 million acres from owners who have failed to demonstrate a productive or legal use of their land, including several high-profile cases involving debt certitude, fraudulent deeds, or obvious lack of investment by conservative political opponents. Still, there are growing concerns that the government's new focus on agro-industrial productivity has compromised its willingness to confront large estate holders and its commitment to land redistribution in general. In an effort to promote food security and expand the agricultural frontier, Morales has recently sought to forge alliances with the agro-business sector. A new law could exempt more than 12 million acres of illegally deforested land outside the national parks from reverting to the state if owners pay a small fine and commit to the agricultural reuse. To facilitate owners' access to credit, the government has also agreed to suspend until 2018 the verification process required to determine whether land holdings are serving a socio-economic purpose. It's currently unclear whether this controversial proposal has been unmodified to exclude the largest estate holders. For Rojas, such measure suggests not only that the process of agricultural transformation has stalled, but there is risk of it being reversed. In any case, it will serve to intensify the current conflict between the highland campesinos and lowland indigenous group over Bolivia's land policy. Unless the Morales government is willing to confront the twin challenges of the minifundio and the latifundio through a more aggressive and strategic land redistribution policy, the growing controversy over land could shape up to be even more powerful than the Tipnis conflict. So, supposedly there's going to be land reform, but if there is no reform of the land, then there is no land reform. Right? It's not even a chicken and egg thing. It's just a gasoline and car thing. So, yeah, that's a few things with Bolivia. So, Bolivia has definitely taken their own step. In 2009, they had their own constitution, so that's revolutionary. It's a new leadership. It was not a coup d'etat. It was an election, so they have legitimacy, right? So, they didn't have any of the bad revolutionary elements and all the good stuff, and they've been allowed to live, right? So, out of all the other countries that America has been coup d'etat in, 1954, Guatemala, and El Salvador and Nicaragua, and just really on, right? Grenada and Chile, and just all these other countries had, we assassinated their elected socialist president, and so these were allowed to live. So Hugo Chavez was allowed to basically fill out to the end of his death, right? He allowed to rule his thing. Fidel Castro, he was able to rule his land for the entire time. And so we see a lot of promise with Evo Morales, who's been in there, and actually you create a martyr out of these people. So really, if any of these guys were to go down, I feel like there would be more that would replace them, because they are popular for a reason. They are not popular because they are evil dictators, but they are dictators who are responsive to their people, which is different than the dictatorships here in the United States of America. So we have a lot to learn from Bolivia. Bolivia shows us how we can do land reform and how we can do peaceful land reform and how you can even eminent domain. It's got to have a productive purpose. It's got to have a, if it's just dead land that's just being wasted, what good is that? That's not helping anybody, having wasted land. You got all this land and it's just turned into waste. Let someone build a house there. Sell the land. You get money for the land, and then somebody else gets to live in the land and then improve it and use it to produce something. Everybody should have a little garden or something, right? Shouldn't everybody be producing something? Wouldn't that increase our productivity rate as Americans? We have a high GDP rate anyways, but imagine if we individually thought ourselves as economic units and created as much as we could as the corporations that we all are, since our heart beats day in, day out, never stopping, always potentially able to make money from it.